Thanks for that nice introduction, Kristen. And yes, it's true. I do love this library. Okay, so, and now, citizens, gather around your loudspeakers. It is time to discuss a story of great importance to our time. Now, if you've already had the pleasure of reading our guest's new novel, The Orphan Master's Son, you will understand the reference. If not, suffice it to say it's the official voice of the People's Democratic Republic of North Korea, and it opens, closes, and intermittently chimes in throughout the book we'll be discussing tonight. Published in, I believe it was late December, Adam? The book?
January 10th.
January 10th, okay. Published recently by Random House, The Orphan Master's Son received rave reviews and publications ranging from the New York Times to Entertainment Weekly, and it's on its 7th week on the Northern California bestseller list. What's it about? Well, I debated with myself long and hard just how much to say, because so much of what makes it a great read is the way the plot is unveiled, jumping back and forth through time, often relying on narrators who are sometimes unreliable because, frankly, what they experience is at odds with what they're being told they're experiencing. But for the sake of a quick description, I'm going to lift directly from the book's jacket because it sums it up so succinctly. The Orphan Master's Son follows a young man's journey through the icy waters, dark tunnels, and eerie spy chambers of the world's most mysterious dictatorship, North Korea. Part breathless thriller, part story of innocence lost, part story of romantic love, it is also a riveting portrait of a world heretofore hidden from view, a North Korea rife with hunger, corruption, and casual cruelty, but also of camaraderie, stolen moments of beauty and of love. Adam Johnson was born in South Dakota and grew up in the suburbs of Phoenix, Arizona. He has a PhD in English from Florida State University. In 1999, he arrived at Stanford University as a Wallace Stegner Fellow and has been there ever since, now as an associate professor of English with an emphasis on creative writing. His fiction has appeared in magazines ranging from Esquire to Playboy and has been included in collections of the best American short stories. He is also the author of Emporium, a short story collection, and in 2003, the novel Parasites Like Us, which won a California Book Award. And that's just one of the many, many literary awards he's received. He was also a 2010 National Endowment for the Arts Fellow. He lives in San Francisco with his wife and 3 children. Tonight he will read an excerpt from his book, then join me on stage for some questions. And we'll also be opening up questions to the audience. And there should be cards for you. I don't know if you have them here. We have them outside. But if during the course of the conversation a question comes up, please feel free to write them and pass them to the aisles to our volunteers. My plan is to wrap this up before 9 o'clock to leave time for book sales and for Mr. Johnson to sign some books and get out of here at a reasonable hour. So with that, I would like to welcome to the podium Adam Johnson.
I set that there. Thank you. Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me? Yes. I hear myself very spookily, as if in a submarine. But that's not bad. Thanks for coming out tonight. What a sophisticated looking audience. I can tell you are very smart people and with good taste. I was going to read 8 pages from the book, maybe about 17, 18 minutes. No one should fall asleep during this, probably. And then we'll do a Q&A. I look forward to that. Has anyone here traveled to the Democratic People's Republic of Korea? Fantastic. Please share when the time comes your adventures. I look forward to that. See if I can turn on this light. Sorry, I'm not trying to be dramatic. Just getting my glasses out. This thing isn't hooked up, is it? Is it? Can you hear me any better like this than like this? Just like this. Okay, beautiful. I'm going to stand next to this thing as opposed to hiding behind it. This is from... Whoa. Let stabilize this. How about that? No sudden movements. This is from late in the book. Our narrator here lives in Pyongyang. He's an interrogator. Don't call him a torturer. He doesn't like that. Is this mic going to be touchy? Okay. It's from late in the book. There's no way you could know what's going on, so just let go. Our hero in the book is Commander Ga. He is just the tiniest corner of the scene. He's a secondary character here. For 10 hours, I interrogated Commander Ga, but I could trick him into revealing nothing. Instead of confessing to killing the actress and her children, he only said that they flew away on a big bird to a land of make-believe. If you don't talk to me, I told Commander Ga, the Pubyok will get their turn at you. Commander Ga had a tattoo of this actress on his chest. It was large and deeply inked. He clutched it. I'm not afraid of pain, he told me. The first thing the Pubyok will do, I told Commander Ga, is take that pretty picture from you. He was dehydrated. He struggled to swallow. You can't separate the two of us, he said. The actress and I, we have no secrets. We have shared everything. His was the toughest citizen biography I'd ever tried to write, but I'd get him to talk eventually. If there was one thing we had no shortage of in North Korea, it was forever. I hung up my smock at Division 42 and made haste for the subway, hoping to make it home before Pyongyang's power went out for the night. The Kwangbok station, with its beautiful murals of Lake Samji, was my stop. Urchin girls grilled green onion tails on the sidewalk, while old-timers played ghost stop in the twilight. On the streets, I bartered Commander Ga's military medals for cucumbers and sesame paste. Apartment lights slowly came to life, and you could see that no one lived above the 9th floor of their apartment buildings. The elevators never worked, and if they did, the power was bound to go out and trap you between floors. My building was the glory of Mount Pektu, and I lived on the 22nd floor, a height that made sure my elderly parents never went out unattended. Inside, I cooked them dinner. When they tasted the food, they praised Kim Jong-il for its flavor. And when I asked after their day, they said it certainly wasn't as hard as the day of the dear leader Kim Jong-il who carried the fate of the people on his back. You see, their eyesight failed at the same time, and ever since they've become paranoid that there might be someone around they can't perceive, ready to report them for anything they say. They listen to the loudspeaker all day and are careful never to reveal a personal feeling, lest it get them denounced by a stranger they can't quite lay their eyes on. I apologize. The next day, a citizen was apprehended with a cellular telephone, which he claimed Commander Ga had given him for safekeeping. The battery was long since dead, and I couldn't help thinking that all of Commander Ga's secrets were stored inside. That was nonsense, what he said about having no secrets, even as I strapped my subjects into the autopilot and cranked up the electricity, even when it didn't matter anymore. They kept on confessing. I stared at that phone. How could I get it to talk? My parents' vision had become so bad that when I arrived home, I had to tell them that night had fallen. I helped them to their cots, placed side by side near the stove. They stared at the ceiling with their blank eyes. My father's eyes had gone white, but my mother's were clear and expressive. I sometimes suspected that maybe her vision wasn't as ruined as his. Mother, Father, I said, I have to go out for a while. My father said, may the everlasting wisdom of Kim Jong-il guide you. Obey the curfew, my mother told me. I had Commander Ga's wedding ring in my pocket, along with his cellular phone. Mother, I said, can I ask you a question? Yes, son. How come you never found a bride for me? Our first duty is to country, she said, then to leaders, then to... I know, I told her. Then to the party, then to the charter of the Workers' Assembly, and so on. But I was at Youth Brigade. I studied Juche ID at Kim Il-sung University. It's just that I have no wife. You sound troubled, my father said. I saw the fingers twitch on his right hand. When I was a boy, one of his gestures was to reach out with that hand to ruffle my hair. That's how he would reassure me when we saw neighbors being transported or executions in the soccer stadium. So I knew he was still in there, that despite the distemper of his patriotism, my father was still my father. Outside on Sanuju Street, even in the dark, I could see that troops of Juche girls had chalked the sidewalks with revolutionary slogans. I headed for the Ragwandong district, where long ago the Japanese built slums to house the most defiant Koreans. That's where there's an illegal night market at the base of the abandoned Ryugyong Hotel. Crossing the Palgal Bridge, pipes were dumping sewage from the pastel housing blocks, and in the water, shit-streaked pages of the Rodong Sinmun newspaper spread like gray lily pads. The deals took place around the rusted elevator shafts. A few sellers didn't like the look of me, but one was willing to talk. He was young, and his ear had been notched by a Pubyok agent. I handed him Commander Ga's phone. He pulled the battery, licked its contacts, then checked the internal card. "This is good," he said. "What do you want for it?" "I'm not selling it," I told him. "I need a charger for the thing." I showed him Commander Ga's wedding ring. He laughed. "Unless you're selling the phone, get out of here," he told me. Several years ago, after an April 15th ceremony, the local Pubyok squad got drunk at Division 42, and I took the opportunity to lift one of their badges. I pulled it out now and let it gleam in the dark. I said I need a phone charger, I told him. "Let me see this," he said, and took the badge, feeling its power. "You'll get your charger," he said, "but keep the ring. I trade for this." The phone charged all night, its little light still glowing yellow as I cooked my parents' breakfast. Morning news from the loudspeaker had them depressed. There'd been a big story about poverty and starvation in South Korea. "Luckily, the dear leader's sending them food aid," my father said. "I hope they can hang on till reunification." It was while we were eating our porridge that the phone's light turned green. I toyed with the device, scrolling through the menus. My father heard its funny beeps and tones. "Have you got something there?" he asked. "No," I told him. For a moment, it felt like my mother glanced at the phone, but when I looked up, she was staring straight ahead. I passed it back and forth before her eyes. I returned to the keypad. I tried to think of someone to call. A friend, a colleague, a relative, a woman. "Father," I said, "if you were to contact someone, who would it be?" "Why would I contact anyone?" he asked. "I have no need." "It's not need," I said. "Wouldn't you want to call a friend or a relative?" "Our party comrades fulfill our needs," my mother said. "What about your aunt?" I asked my father. "Don't you have an aunt in the South?" His face was blank. "We have no ties to that capitalist nation," he said. My mother said, "We denounce her." "I'm not asking as a state interrogator," I told him. "I'm your son. This is family talk." I returned to the phone, moving through its functions, all of which seemed disabled. It looked like I'd be selling the thing after all. "Hey, wait," I said. "When I was a boy, you used to play cards with a couple from the factory. Aren't you curious what happened to them? Wouldn't you contact them if you could?" "I don't believe I've heard of these people," my mother said. "I'm sure of it," I told her. "I remember them clearly." "No," she said, "you're mistaken." "Mother, it's me," I said. "There's no one else in the room. No one's listening." "Stop this dangerous talk," my father said. "We met with no one." I reached to take his hand, but the touch surprised him. He recoiled. "Father, it's me. It's your son. Take my hand." "Is this a test?" he asked. His white eyes roamed the room. "Are we being tested?" There's a talk that every father has with his son, in which he brings the child to understand that there are things we must say on the outside, while inside, we're still family. I was 8 when my father had this talk with me. We were under a tree on Moranbang Hill. He told me that there was a path set out for us. On it, we had to do everything the signs commanded and heed all the announcements along the way. We must walk this path alone on the outside, but inside we would be holding hands. On Sundays, the factories were closed, so that day the air was clear, and I could imagine this path stretching ahead across the Taedong Valley. We ate blueberry-flavored ices and listened to the sounds of old men at their Changi boards. My father said to me, I denounce this boy for having a blue tongue. We laughed about that. I pointed at my father. This citizen eats mustard, I said to him. I'd recently tried mustard for the first time, and the look on my face had made everyone laugh. My father addressed an invisible authority in the air. This boy has counter-revolutionary thoughts about mustard, he said. He should be sent away to a farm to correct his mustardly thinking. We laughed about that. Now take my hand, he told me. I put my small hand in his, and then his mouth became sharp with hate. He snapped, I denounce this citizen as an imperialist puppet who should be remanded to stand trial for crimes against the state. His face was red and venomous. I've witnessed this boy spew capitalist diatribes in an effort to poison our minds with this traitorous filth. The old men turned from their game to observe us. I was terrified, on the verge of crying. My father said, see, my mouth said that, but my hand, it was holding yours. If your mother must ever say something like that to me in order to protect the two of you, know that inside, she and I are holding hands. And if someday you must say something like that to me, I'll know it's not the real you. Inside is where the Father and the Son will always be holding hands. Reached out and ruffled my hair. At work, I took all my frustrations out on Commander Ga, interrogating him relentlessly, but he only begged for the can of peaches he'd been carrying when we arrested him. What's so special about these peaches, I asked, and studied the can. I hadn't had a peach myself since they closed the canning factory after botulism killed half of Nampo. We'd waterboarded Ga over and over. All he could say was bowl and spoon. That night I felt weak, like my body was hungering for some kind of food I'd never run across. I thought of the dogs in the Central Zoo that lived only on cabbage and old tomatoes. When I turned to go home, I found the subway shut down, and the queue for the Quang Bok Express bus was 3 blocks long. I started walking. I didn't make it 2 blocks before I heard the bullhorns and knew I was in trouble. The Minister of Mass Mobilization was sweeping up any citizen unlucky enough to be out on the street. You couldn't run. If they even thought you were trying to avoid volunteering for harvest duty, it was off to a redeemability farm. It was, however, the kind of thing a Pubyok badge could get you out of. Without it, I found myself in the back of a dump truck headed to the countryside to pull rice for 16 hours. We drove northeast by moonlight toward the silhouetted Myoyang Range, the driver flashing on his headlamps when he thought he saw something in the road, but there was nothing in the road. No people, no cars, nothing but empty highways lined with tank traps. In the dark, we found a peasant village somewhere along the Chunchun River. A city folk, about 30 of us, climbed down to sleep on the open ground. I had my smock to keep me warm. For 5 years, I'd used a Pubyok badge to escape harvest details, so I'd forgotten the sounds of crickets in the summer, the mist that rises off rice water. I heard children in the dark and the sounds of a man and woman engaged in what must have been genital intercourse. What followed was my best night's sleep in years. There was no breakfast, and my hands blistered before the sun was fully up. Why we drained one rice field and flooded another, I had no idea. But light dawned hard on the peasants of Chigang province. They all wore cheap, ill-fitting Vinalon clothes. Their bodies were rail thin, their teeth translucent to the black cores. In the afternoon, a city woman was struck by a grand snake, long as a man. I tried to quiet her screams by stroking her hair, but that snake bite must have done something to her. She started hitting me and pushing me away. The peasants caught the twisting snake, black as the befeckled water that had concealed it. Some wanted to take its gallbladder. Others wished to milk its venom for liquor. I tried to convince them to free the snake, arguing that another black snake must be out there somewhere, waiting for this broad swimmer to make its way home. It was midnight before I made it home. Though my key turned in the lock, the door wouldn't open. It was somehow barricaded from within. I pounded on the door. "Mama," I called. "Father, it's me, your son. There's something wrong with the door," I shouted. But eventually I buttoned down my smock and lay in the hall. I thought of the peasants laying there on the concrete with their children and their loud intercourse, and of how, except for starvation, they didn't have a care in the world. Lying there in the dark, Commander God's phone lit green and beeped. On its tiny screen, I discovered a picture. There was a Korean woman and her children. They stood smiling against a sunny blue sky. They wore black caps with ears that made them look like mice. One morning, the door was standing open. Inside, my mother was cooking porridge while my father sat at the table. "Who's there?" my father asked. "It's me, Father, your son." "Thank goodness you're back," he said. "We were worried about you." My mother said nothing. At work, I had pulled my parents' secret files, trying to find clues as to why they were so difficult. Getting information out of strangers was easy, not so with my parents. Now, on the table, those secret files had been rifled. "The door was blocked last night," I said. "Didn't you hear me pounding?" "I didn't hear anything," Father said. "My wife, did you hear anything?" "Nothing," she said from the stove. I straightened the files. "I suppose you two have gone deaf now as well." Mother shuffled to the table with her bowls of porridge. I asked, "But why was the door blocked? You're not afraid of me, are you?" My mother said the loudspeaker claimed the American Navy was conducting aggressive military exercises off the coast. "When it comes to the Americans," my father said, "you can't take any chances." They blew on their food and took quiet spoonfuls. "How is it," I asked my mother, "that you can cook so well without your eyesight?" As the food cooks, she said, the smell changes. In my mother's secret file, I found a photo of her when she was young. She was a beauty, perhaps the reason she was brought to the capital from the countryside, but what got her sentenced to a factory rather than assigned as a singer or a hostess was not in her record. I ruffled the folders in the air. There were some papers on the table," my father said. His voice was nervous. "Yes, they accidentally fell to the floor," my mother said. "We picked them up." "It was an accident," my father repeated. "Oh, accidents happen," I told them. "Those papers," my mother said, "were they work-related?" "Yes," Father said. "Are they part of a case you're working on?" "Just research," I said. "Well, they must have been important files if you brought them home," my father said. "Is anyone in trouble? Perhaps anyone we know?" "What's going on here?" I asked them. "Is this about Mrs. Kwok? Are you still mad at me for sending her to a labor farm? She was caught red-handed stealing coal from the furnace. You know the rules." "Don't get mad," my mother said. "We were just showing concern for the unlucky souls in your files." "Unlucky?" I asked her. "What makes you call them that?" They both went silent. Slowly, I waved my mother's file once before her eyes, yet she made no track of it. Then I fanned her with the file. When the breeze moved across her face, she recoiled, inhaling. "What is it?" my father asked. "What just happened?" She said nothing. "Can you see me, Mother?" I asked her. "It's important that I know if you can see me." She faced my direction, though her eyes were without focus. "Can I see you?" she asked me. "I see you as I first saw you, in glimpses through darkness." "Spare me the riddles," I warned her. "I have to know the answer to this." "You were born at night," she told me. "I labored all day, and when darkness fell, we had no candles. You came by feel into your father's hands. These hands," he said, and lifted them, scarred by machine looms. Such was the year Juche 62, my mother said. Such was life in a dormitory factory. Your father lit match after match, one after another, he said, until they were gone. I touched every part of your body, she told me, at first to see if you were whole, and then to know you. So new you were, so innocent. You could have become anyone. It took a while until first flight that we got a look at what we'd created. I need to be able to trust you, I told her. I cannot have you lying to me. My mother ignored this. Our eyes do not work. That's the answer to your question. But then as now, we don't need sight to see what you've become. I'll stop there. Stop there on a cheery note. There is some sex in the book. Wait till you hit page 292. Man. Okay. All right.
All right.
Sorry. I don't know why I laughed. Okay.
Okay. Well, let's hopefully the microphone situation, is this working? Is this okay? Okay. So, your timing turned out to be really good because obviously, to me, I think the death of the Kim Jong-il, also known as the Dear Leader, raised interest in the subject North Korea, and which is a place most of us know very, very little about. And I want to get your insights into what's going on in North Korea now, just because you have spent some time studying there. But first, I want to start by finding out what possessed you to write a book about North Korea.
I just began as a reader. When I write fiction, I usually read nonfiction. And it was the year 2004, I was working on a project, and I just picked up The Aquariums of Pyongyang by Kang Chol-hwan. Has anyone read that book here? It's about Kang's 9 years in Camp 15 in North Korea, which is called Yodok. It's the family prison, one of the family prisons in North Korea. It's the big one. And when you commit an infraction against the state, it's the 3-generation rule that Kim Il-sung founded in the early 70s. Your whole family goes. That they pluck the weed by the roots, and they get everyone around you to take a circle of anti-revolutionary thinking out of society. And so Kang was 9 when he went in and 18 when he got out. His uncle had committed an infraction. So his grandmother went in, his parents went in. There were 9 of them. They went in together. He brought his goldfish in a jar, his aquarium, and to Camp 15. You don't get out of Camp 15. It's, you know, one of the camps where you work until you die. But they had rich relatives in Japan. And February 16th is Kim Jong-il's birthday, which was movie day in the Gulag. And April 15th is the birthday of Kim Il-sung. And every April 15th, they commute the sentence of one family. There are 50,000 people in Yodok right now. And it's dark here, so it's morning over there. They're just getting up to go into the mines and to go cut timber. They have a soy sauce factory, a cement factory, a distillery there. It's home to the Respect for Elders Furniture Factory, which is where they weed out all the old people who make furniture until they die. But his family was bought out bribed after 9 years. And that just began an obsession. I couldn't believe that this place existed on Earth. You know, Auschwitz lasted 3 years on this planet, and these gulags are going on 50 years right now. And I didn't know about them. I couldn't believe I didn't know about them. And I just began reading lots of narratives, especially the narratives of defectors.
And I think anybody else who's read this, you can't help but be reminded of Orwell's 1984, especially in the way that the culture is framed by euphemisms. I know many have said that's the same. Compare and contrast. 1984 and The Orphan Master's Son.
Well, I mean, Orwell, you know, set that book in a fictional, distant future. But this place is real and operating right now. And, you know, I don't know how perfectly I captured the place, but I researched, I devoured everything I could find for about 5.5 years. And the truth is, you know, I had to tone down the darkness of North Korea for the book. A lot of the books I read were about geopolitics, about nuclear issues, about economic issues, but very rare was the book that found that human dimension. How do you retain your humanity and your identity inside of a totalitarian state when your whole family's at risk, when you begin familial levels of censorship? Now we have Barbara Demick's Nothing to Envy, which I don't know if anyone's read that here. That is an utterly fantastic work of nonfiction that I didn't have access to, though I read her reporting in the LA Times as I worked. But to try to get that human dimension that wasn't really out there in the nonfiction, and of course we can talk about North Korean novels if you like, but you know, to get that, I had to take the absurdity of North Korea out. The real Kim Jong-il's jet skis and his water parks, Kim Jong-il kidnapping South Korean artists to make a North Korean Godzilla movie called Pulgasari. You know, I had to leave this stuff out, and the true darkness of the camps, for the few narratives we have of people who escaped from a camp, then escaped from North Korea, and unfortunately you have to escape from southern China. They're the most nightmarish things that I've really read about. And so you'll notice that my character does go into a gulag. He goes in on one page, you flip the page, it says, a year later, and he's out. Because those sequences were unreadable, you know, and those were maybe the most non-fiction-ish of the book, and I had to throw them out. And I used the shape of the narrative to suggest the trauma, the fragmentation of experience that this character had gone through.
Right. So I want to get a little bit into just the fact, and you've sort of started going down that path, the fact versus the fiction and your research process. It sounds like it was a lot of just reading, but you also went to North Korea, didn't you?
I did travel there, yes. You know, I'm not an expert on North Korea. I haven't pretended to be. Everything I found was open source. And it's nothing that you couldn't find if you obsessively searched the web for narratives for 5 or 6 years.
Right.
It searched Google Earth, which is geotagged by defectors. Well, that's the amazing thing. People who've gotten out of North Korea, you go on Google Earth, and they're like, this is the barracks where I lived. This is the mine head where I was. I mean, they've tagged that whole nation.
Wow.
And we have the defectors. Every year there's more defectors. Last year there were 6,344 defectors from North Korea who made it to the south. And they go to a place called Hanawon, which is a facility that helps introduce them into a Western civilization. First they're debriefed, and they have their narratives written down. They're assessed to see whether they're agents, and they caught a couple assassins in October, if you'll remember. And then their health needs are attended to. Dentistry is one of the biggest issues there. And they go to a school for 6 weeks to 4 months that just teaches them, you know, there are no stoplights in North Korea. They don't know how to deal with a bank account, what a landlord is and what he wants from you, how society works. If you're North Korean and someone walks up to you and says, hey, how you feeling? That's a dangerous, aggressive question to ask someone from that society to reveal those personal feelings. So they're not even used to this social lubrication that we are, and they have to be taught these things. But it's from their narratives that we get really a pretty great portrait, especially of the rural provinces. The problem with North Korea is that people don't tend to defect from Pyongyang. If you live in Pyongyang, you're of the top few percent of the nation. You're probably not going to starve. Your kids are going to go to a school where they get educated instead of indoctrinated. You're going to have a decent job that's probably meaningful. Also means you have a good Songbun rating, which is a rating that suggests the loyalty of your family since the revolution. If you have a good Songbun, it means no one has committed an infraction against the state in 3 generations. So people don't flee Pyongyang because relatively they've made it. And so that's the mystery of North Korea, really. That's where fact and fiction, you know, I had to turn to fiction. Sorry, I rambled there.
No, that's excellent. Okay, I just have. Do they really in the book? The character is kidnapping Japanese citizens off the beaches, and why do they do that?
Well, everything that seems like it was probably fiction in the book is
right.
The fact part,
right?
Because it's North Korea. You know, just these little details. Like when I was there, and night would come to Pyongyang, no one lived above the 8th or 9th floors. Because there are no elevators and the power goes out. And so if you're a veteran or a widow of a veteran, you're allowed to live on the 1st floor where you don't have to climb stairs. And if you're a young couple, you'll live on the 10th floor of your building. And all these buildings are 22 stories tall, utterly unused because they can't manage power there. It's not that they can't manage it, they can't produce it. But in the book, I mean, we found 6 incursion tunnels into South Korea. They're 10,000 men an hour. They're made to move 10,000 troops an hour to invade the South. We know that they use their fishing boats for counterfeit currency. The whole reason we redesigned our $100 note in America is because the North Koreans perfected our old $100 note. They're the best counterfeiters in the world. They move heroin, they move methamphetamine, they move rocket parts. They'll move anything on their fishing boats. We believe they've kidnapped 120 people from the beaches of Japan. And this is a side effect of them being so insular, that they really have no knowledge of other cultures, but they have a need to infiltrate them and to spy upon them. And so, you know, they've admitted to 35 kidnappings. They freed a family, which is how we got the return of an American named Charles Jenkins. Has anyone heard of Charles Jenkins? Yeah. He came out in 2005. He's one of the few people to make it across the 15 million landmines that comprise the DMZ. There are landmines, which is why we won't sign the Global Landmine Ban Treaty. He drank 10 beers in the year 1963 and stumbled across the DMZ. And when he was apprehended, there's a tattoo removal scene in my book, not to spoil anything. When he was apprehended and they saw his USMC tattoo, they took a knife and without anesthesia cut it off his body. He was then forced for his first 5 years to copy the collected works of Kim Il-sung by hand, by longhand, which is one of my characters unfortunately has to do. You know, and they married him to a woman named Hitomi Mora, who'd been kidnapped off the beaches of Japan. And because of their sense of racial purity, you know, a Korean couldn't marry a Japanese person in that society, and no one could marry Charles Jenkins. And so they arranged marriages are a very normal thing there. They just married them up. You know? And they had 2 daughters. And in 2005, they let Hitomi, as a gesture of goodwill, visit home, from which they promptly defected. And that's how Charles Jenkins came back. He was immediately court-martialed and spent time in prison for desertion. I think he did 3 months. I think he had a little time served. The last I heard of Charles Jenkins, he was a greeter in a Walmart in Georgia.
That's a great story.
They put Charles Jenkins into the language school in Pyongyang where he taught them English. But they didn't understand he was from North Carolina, and he was training them all to have a southern accent. And when they discovered that, they, quote, fired him, which is something that doesn't happen in North Korea. And he became an actor. And in all the propaganda movies, you can see them on YouTube, when they do a close-up of an American bayoneting a baby, well, it would be him. He was the one American they had. And he was the evil American representative in all the movies. So these details are there. I mean, you can't make stuff like that up.
Right. Well, and I was not aware you could see those movies on YouTube, so I...
Go watch Pulgasari, Pulgasari. Kim Jong-il's crowning achievement as a human being, a communist Godzilla movie.
Well, and in your book, one of the main characters is an actress, and my sense is she's like the national actress. She's in all of the movies, and I was going to have you talk a little bit more about Korean movies, but also just some of their great titles. Can you?
You know, I mean, they're propaganda movies. Sea of Blood, The True Daughter of the Country. You know, here's something to think about when you think about North Korea is that they were invaded by Japan in 1910. If you look back a millennium, they've been a pawn between China and Japan and Mongolia. Self-determination for the Korean Peninsula has been a lifelong issue in terms of their entire history documented. And if you look at their last century, they're completely subjugated by the Japanese from 1910 to 1935. They brought 5 million slave laborers back to the mainland because the Japanese men had to serve, they had a duty to serve the imperial army. And so the Koreans, the whole peninsula, they lived on millet. All the rice was sent to Japan. When we dropped bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki on the Mitsubishi factories, those factories were filled with Koreans. Then you think about losing a third of a century that way. And the Japanese, you know, directly tried to erase their own identity, their own cultural identity, outlawing the Gayagim and the Taegum, getting rid of their music, their language, their literature. Then World War II, a great disruption. Then partition between the United States and the Soviet Union. Then the Korean War. then 60 years of a totalitarian dictatorship. They're just as artistic and creative and bright and curious as we are, but for a century, these things have divorced them from their own traditions and cultures. They've lost it. And so they can play virtuosic piano, violin, but they don't get to choose their songs. Their songs aren't representative of their cultural lineage. And one of the first things I tried to do was find a book written by a North Korean. And I went to the East Asia Studies Library at Stanford University, and I said, I'd like a novel, you know. And for people who love books in the room, and I assume that's all of you, this is a nation in which no one that we know of has written a literary novel as we would think of it in 60 years. Not one has made it out that we have as evidence that someone wrote to question the human experience, to plumb the inner depths of life, to hold a mirror to society, to all of these things that we turn to novels to, or to any art, you know, to examine. They don't exist. We don't have proof of one. Maybe someone's written them and they haven't made it out. Maybe they're circulated in some way we don't know about. But even the Soviets could turn to Pushkin in the worst of times. Even Solzhenitsyn got his novels out of the Gulag. Here we have nothing. And that also means that no one has read a book that's not propaganda in 60 years. It's a place without a voice. And I read some of the propaganda novels too. You know, they're kind of fun in their own ridiculous way. You know, they always end with people doubling their work quotas and saluting, you know, Kim Jong-il. And, but I can recommend a couple funny ones if people ask me afterward that are available. So when you think about their movies and their opera, and they're not their books. It's the narrative of the regime. And they're all utterly uniform in their messages and utterly unsatisfying in any way at all except as spectacle.
Well, and in your book, a famous American movie, Casablanca, has a role. And I'm curious how, at what point you decided to include it. Was it as you were writing and your narrative was coming along, you saw some similar themes, or did you bring the book into it and was there a chicken and the egg kind of thing, or just talk about that?
Well, let me back to this idea that they don't have artists there who are allowed self-determination.
Right.
They're people with great craft and abilities, but who knows when and how they share their own inner experiences through their art. But Kim Jong-il, I mentioned Pulgasari, I don't mean to go back to it, but he just, before he was the dear leader, right, when he took over in 1994 when his father died, you know, he ran the Central Cinema Agency in Pyongyang, and he was in charge of all the movies. And he thought he was going to make a movie that would shock the world with its stunning power, and that this is the way that he was going to promulgate, you know, the great abilities of the DPRK, except that he had no artists. He only had people that would do whatever he said under threat of death. And so he kidnapped Choi Eun-hee, which was a famous South Korean actress, and her husband was Shin Sang-gok, who was a famous South Korean director. He kidnapped Choi, or he imprisoned Choi, and when Shin came to Pyongyang to plead for her release, he was thrown in jail too. And Kim Jong-il said, if you make my movie Pulgasari, and I'll give you every resource of this nation, when it's done, I'll free you. And they said no, and they were imprisoned for 3.5 years. See, by squelching all artistic ability there, he then was bereft of any ability to express anything original. And he had to steal humans and force them to do what he wanted. Of course, the movie's laughably horrible because Kim Jong-il supposedly wrote the script himself. Shin Sang-gok's friends were famous directors, and they got the Cannes Film Festival to do a screening of Pulgasari, which really happened. Kim Jong-il was invited to attend it, but he doesn't fly. He only travels by bulletproof train. I speak of him in the present tense because he's alive in my book. And, you know, Choi and Shin were allowed to go to the premiere, at which point they escaped. Yeah. But I thought of, like, what if you were someone who was forced to spend your entire life playing whatever marches of Kim Il-sung, whatever opera was dictated that year, what if you saw a movie or read a book from the way we might think of it, whose sole job was to look inward and question the human experience and reveal longings and yearnings and desires and how they play out when people make choices, based on self-definition. And in my book, this actress, she's a diva like any actress. She thinks she's the greatest actress in the world. And then she finally sees a real movie. She finally gets her first look at art. And she says, my life must change right now. She says to our character, you have to get me to the land where this movie was made.
Not to discount the fact that North Korea is the most oppressive place on this earth, and conditions are horrifying. And you seem to suggest sometimes some parallels, though, between conditions there and in the West. And for example, veterans of the Cold War and now the War on Terror would be able to identify with your portrayal of a regime that gets its people to act against its own self-interest now and then by convincing that the enemy is about to launch a massive attack. Did you intend for the North Korea to be an object lesson for us, or is it just so far off the reality mark? That's a silly supposition.
Well, there's a lot of cultural commentary in the book. One of the voices of the book is the voice of propaganda, the state-sponsored voice. And it's hard for me to express, or to even know, let alone to try to convey, what it must be like to live under the weight of propaganda daily. And Kim Il-sung in the early 70s wired the nation for cable radio. He thought that couldn't be jammed or intercepted. So all the apartment blocks and apartment floors, housing blocks, factories have loudspeakers in them that you can't turn off. And this was, in the 70s and 80s, one of the great offenses that would get you sent to a place like Yodok, was tampering with your loudspeaker. And it was supposedly an early warning system should the Americans, attack again. And, again, North Korea has been in a period of self-determination in which they have not been occupied by a foreign power for many decades. And after what they've been through for so long, this is actually something that they haven't even known. And this is an achievement that is rare in their history. And, the Americans, if you read Bruce Cummings' books, people accuse him for being pro-North Korea. I think he just gets their perspective very well. And he just really lays out the Korean War from their perspective. Even though the North Koreans started it with a surprise attack, the Americans bombed that country so mercilessly. We had an Air Force that was created to operate in 2 global theaters simultaneously that we unleashed on a country this big. We dropped a bomb in Pyongyang for every 6 square meters. And when we were done firebombing Pyongyang, only 3 buildings stood. So we bombed dams. We bombed every target we could think of there. And so their terror, their true terror at the Americans is for real. Of course, that's usurped to be used against them, but we have to remember that perspective. The weight of propaganda, to have it mercilessly play lies to you all day, every day, is something that's hard to comprehend. The Central Party's newspaper, the Rodong Sinmun, is translated by the Japanese, who are, of course, the most obsessed people in the world with North Korea. And they translate it into English, Spanish, and Japanese every day. And every day I get up and I read the party newspaper from Pyongyang. And it is so mind-numbingly unusable, the information. It is so ridiculously foolish and repetitive. And to live your life under that sense is something that I can't quite imagine. But I felt that for a Western reader, you had to feel that constant lie that was always commenting on everything. But my challenge as a writer was how to not bore the reader to death with it. I found that I would laugh at propaganda. And of course, if you're living under it, it's evil. But from my perspective, there is something funny from it. And all the ridiculously funny propaganda lines, I didn't have to make up. They came straight out of the North Korean newspapers. So it's their voice. I'm rambling.
No, it was good. I was going to say, and that's really one of the most fun parts about this book, are just the little interludes where you hear the voice through the loudspeakers.
Question?
I was looking more for the idea of people who live, politicians who
one thing that you find in the propaganda is constant critique of America. Japan and South Korea, but constant critique of America. And to get that right, that voice had to be constantly critiquing us. And you know what? I think we're vulnerable to a lot of critique. And I used that to my advantage. From the North Korean perspective, South Korea is not a state of self-determination. They're living under occupation. We have 30,000 troops there. We park our nuclear Trident submarines there. Why do we have our nuclear bombs there? To the north, it's clear that we are occupying them militarily. It's clear. Why don't we ask that question? Why do we have our nukes in South Korea? I think it's a pretty fair question that I don't hear asked too often. And that's one that the North Koreans ask every single day. But, we also, looking at America from the North Korean eyes, like I mentioned, the Respect for Elders Furniture Factory, which of course is the opposite of respect for old people.
Right.
Right? But I started looking at what I had been used to as being spin in our country, and seeing real propaganda when it was there. Remember the Healthy Forests Act, right, in 2004 or 5, that allowed increased logging and strip logging.
Right.
That wasn't spin. It was only through looking at North Korea that made me think, I'm used to decoding the spin. Remember the Clear Skies Act that increased the limits of pollution output for large factories? That was actually the opposite, right? That's propaganda. Yeah. And it's easy to make. The passing of Kim Jong-il, I think, has begun a serious conversation about the plight of the people in that country. Right. And I'm glad they're not the subject of buffoonery, easy mockery, because Kim Jong-il had his bouffant hair and et cetera. And that, we look at him not as a madman or as a marionette, but as a person subjugating an entire people, right? And to start asking questions about those people. But one of the ways we all made fun of North Korea was there was that famous satellite image with South Korea glowing at night, right? And then China all aglow. And there was this black space that was North Korea without a single light, And it made them look like they were living in prehistory, honestly. Yeah. But since I've been there and I saw how they struggle to conserve with limited resources, I now look at that picture and I'm like, why are the lights burning all night in America? Why don't we turn our lights off? When I went to Pyongyang, I went to the museums, they had this thing where you would walk up to an escalator and there was a switch. And you would turn it on, and you would ride up to the next floor, you would turn it off and you would get off. And now when I'm at the airport or at a mall and I see these huge people movies just jamming hour after hour with no one on them, the waste is shocking to me. Shocking. So,
one of our people in the audience, and I think everybody's curious about this, is and I do know you did go to North Korea to do some research. What were the circumstances? How does one do that?
Well, it used to be impossible to go to North Korea, and then it was very difficult. That's when I went. Recently, it's been difficult. They're advertising now this summer a trip. I can share the website. The KCNA is reporting a U.S. passport holder trip to North Korea. Any one of you who's willing to pony up the hard currency, they'll let in this summer. It's around. They especially want Americans there to behold the spectacle of Kim Il-sung's 100th birthday. He was born April 15th, 1912. And also, this is going to be a big time in April because not only has there been the transition of power, but they started the national calendar with the year of Kim Il-sung's birth. So even though the country's only 60 years old, he was born 100 years ago, so it's Juche 100 there. Anytime you restart your calendar, it's a bad sign for your society. But so it's their 100th year, even though they're not 100 years old. I applied to go as a visiting scholar to Kim Il-sung University. They have websites in North Korea. They're putting it all out there. One of their goals is to appear to be an urbane, international society that's not a reclusive hermit kingdom, but has relations all over the world. And a lot of their propaganda is constantly talking about their friends around the world. They translate all their works into all the languages of the world, and they have some pretty good websites where you can download all their music. They have 13,000 videos on their YouTube channel that you can watch. I've watched a lot of them. And so they have good websites. I went to a website for Kim Il-sung University, and I applied to be a visiting scholar, and I never heard back. Maybe it was run by the CIA to see who would want to go to Pyongyang. I fell for that when writing to Saddam Hussein once. But, and then there's kind of like the Pyongyang Polytech Institute, which was Kim Jong-il's kind of pet university. And I wrote them, and I offered to host one of their scholars for a year at Stanford. I didn't mention this to anyone at Stanford. I figured I'd deal with that problem when it arose, if they would host me. Wow. But that didn't work out. But finally, I found a human being who had an NGO there, and he was an older gentleman, and he was actually an orphan in the Korean War, and he'd lost his family, and he was from the north, and he came to America at the end of the war at 11, and he was one of the founders of an institute for orphanages in the South, and he started an NGO in the North planting apple orchards. And so his group had planted 14,000 apple trees in North Korea to help them sustain themselves. So he was good friends, trusted by both sides, and he was a rare figure. He knew about my book. He thought my book was important, and he said, I can get you there. So I went. When you travel there, they only open it up a couple weeks a year. They tell you when you'll arrive, when you'll leave. They show you what they want you to see. It's completely monitored. It's illegal for a foreigner to have an interaction with a citizen of North Korea. Wow. So I knew that I wouldn't be able to speak to anyone there, lest I imperil them. But for a fiction writer, that only amps us up to hold something a little out of view. And
how far along were you in your book when you went there?
I was about halfway, so I knew that some.
You already knew that your main character was an orphan.
That's right. I knew and it was talking to this older guy. I don't want to name him because he used his contacts to get me there, and I can't control what happens to anyone in that nation. And but it was him talking about being an orphan in that country and the cultural stigma against orphans and the war, and that first. From the beginning, I knew my character was an orphan just because of this human being that I met and the emotion that he instilled in me from his own personal story. Oh. And, when I could talk about flying into Sassoon Airport.
Should.
On an Aleutian Il-62 from the year 1963. I could talk about this probably forever. But when we landed, I just want to give this one anecdote. When we landed, we met our minders. There were 5 of them because we were Americans. And our main minder turned out to be a very sophisticated, interesting, wonderful woman with a great sense of humor. A true elite, a young man. And, but we drove, the airport's like about 25 minutes north of the capital, and all the roads are gigantically wide for evacuation reasons, should we bomb again. But there are very few vehicles there. There are more now. I think when you talk about North Korea, it changes all the time. The dictates of the regime can swing wildly. Something that's illegal now can be legal next year and can be illegal again. And so, I went in 2007, and I think my experience is a time capsule. People who I've spoken to last year saw vastly different things and had totally different experiences. So I'm not trying to portray something that isn't, because it probably no longer is, but there were very few vehicles, and I researched military vehicles and trucks a lot for my book, because there's certain kind of trucks that can only get you certain places, like to a gulag. And so we drove for like 20 minutes. We were halfway to Pyongyang, and I hadn't seen a single car in North Korea except for the Chinese minivan we were in. And finally, a vehicle was coming at us, And I kind of stuck my head out the window, and lo and behold, it was a dump truck. And I was like, oh, my lucky day, because I've been studying these dump trucks. There's a factory south of Pyongyang that the Soviets built in the late 50s, and because the North Koreans can keep it running but not modernize it, they make brand new vehicles from 1958 there.
Wow.
That's a metaphor for North Korea, you know. They also built a refrigerator factory in the early 60s, and everywhere you go in North Korea, they have the exact same Soviet refrigerator with the clunk down metal handle, with the big curved top. It's the only refrigerator they can get their hands on. They can just keep this factory churning them out. But I saw this dump truck coming, and I was like, oh my God, I'm in North Korea and I'm looking at a dump truck. It came at us. It was heading away from the capital toward the countryside, and we were going toward the capital. And it came and it just flashed by. I only saw it for a few seconds. But what do you think was in the back of the dump truck? People. That's right. It was filled with humans, and they were heading to the countryside. The dump truck was one that didn't have a tailgate. Maybe it was like for a construction yard rather than transportation. So they were all crammed up against the cab. Because the roads are, you know, not the best, and they didn't want to bounce out or anything. And as they went by, only a few seconds, which for a fiction writer is the worst. Because in a glance, then you fill everything in. It just starts growing in your mind. If I'd have studied it, I never would have written about it. But it's this slight look. I saw a guy in a suit coat. He was holding what looked like a briefcase to me. And beside him was a woman in a smock. She had like a lab coat on. She was a researcher or a doctor or something. And it whizzed on by. And I turned around and reminded her. I didn't really know her then. I said, who are those people? Where are they going, you know? And she said, well, they're volunteering to help with the harvest. It's August. And
Scene in the book.
I just was like, who'd take their briefcase with them? I said, they're volunteering? And she said, everyone must volunteer. Like, that was the most obvious thing in the world, is that everyone had to do it. And so that's how an experience like really going there worked its way into my book, to try to think about how this would happen and what this experience might be like. And I used fiction to flesh it out, you know.
Well, since you know more about North Korea, I think, than anybody here, I do, and several people in the audience are very curious what your thoughts are about, with the new leader, how you think things might change. I mean, already we're reading in the news that they're talking about the discussions and looking at the uranium. And
Can I ask this one person who's been there to share an anecdote or to tell us when you went or under what auspices?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. At the Yangakdo Hotel or the Koryo? Yeah, the one on the island, the Yangakdo. That's right. The International Friendship Museum in Myoyang. Mm-hmm. In a nuclear-proof bunker underneath a mountain, should we decide to target the gifts to Kim Jong-il and Kim Il-sung. There's 56,000 of them. Right. Right. Everyone was shown the exact same things. That's been my experience. Everyone who goes, unless it's been very recently, perhaps, but it's all heavily scripted. It's usually the same amount of days, same time of year. They only turn the lights on these couple weeks a year when they let people in. Even when I was there at the Yangakdo Hotel, which was for the Fall Arirang Festival, I saw the same exact performance you did. Even at the height of their tourist season, there were only enough people in the hotel to use the 32nd floor that I was on and the 6th floor. And so when we drive at night and see the Yangakdo on the island, there would just be these two ribbons of visitors. But they want to build a 47-story hotel because it projects internationalism, it makes them look important and worldly, and it's a showpiece. And that would be okay if people weren't starving. Right. The best. And one of the things they do there, it's the worst thing in the world. They can't even conceive of it. They overfeed you to project plenitude. And I'm a big guy, I can eat a lot. They'll feed you 3-4 times what a human being could possibly eat. And the waste that goes away is something they're very, very proud of. And it was so oppressive to go to another meal. I just couldn't bear to eat there, knowing that so many people were hungry. But we've got questions. I know I got to get back on track.
No, that's okay. That's okay. And we're not, I apologize.
Thank
we're not
you.
going to be able to get to, yes, and thank you. We won't be able to get to all of them, but a couple of, we'll do a couple more, and I know we need to wrap it up. From the perspective of the defectors you've talked to, do the North Koreans generally truly worship dear leader, or is it just an act of self-preservation?
That's right. It's this question everyone asks. Were they really weeping at Kim Jong-il's funeral, or were they faking it? That's what we all want to know. Excuse me. To think about this, you kind of have to wrap your head around North Korea a little bit and kind of examine your own beliefs to some degree. When you read, there's a book coming out next month this month from Viking by Blaine Harden. It's called Escape from Camp 14. And it's the story of Shin Dong-hook. And he's the only person that we know of who was born in the North Korean gulag. His was prison 1418. 18's on one side of the gulag. And if you get sent to prison 18, someday you'll get out. But if you cross the gulag or the river and go to 14, you never get out. And it's a big prison. It's 100 square miles over 5 valleys. Shin... birth is illegal in a prison in North Korea, and just all you have to do is read about abortion day, and you'll realize why I couldn't, put these things in my book, because people can't take them without a context.
Right.
And Shin talks about because his parents were collaborators with the guards, they had the privilege of having kids, and he saw his mother executed, his brother executed. And when he defected, of course, his father was tortured to death. He knew when he defected that they'd kill his father. The person he escaped with didn't understand the electric fence, and his name was Park. He was electrocuted on the fence, and the weight of his body sagged the wire down that allowed Shin to sneak through. And, then, of course, he has to get out of, North Korea. But his is an interesting example because there's a lot of YouTube videos on him, of people interviewing him. And he had a great effect on the writing of my book. And I'm so grateful that this Washington Post reporter, Blaine Harden, is telling his story. It's a great book. I've just read it. But back to this question of reality there, Shin talks about notions that we take for granted that are very difficult for him. This notion of freedom is an abstraction that he just can't get his head around. And it's based on one thing that he has difficulty thinking about is the idea of possibility, that there are different paths that could be taken in life, that there could be different futures, and that it's his job to determine which path to go down, that it should be centered inside of him. And so, you know, when the future is also a difficult concept that you see defectors struggling with, because they're living in a survival mode, a moment-to-moment, day-by-day survival. And pondering the past and contemplating the future doesn't help you survive in any way. In fact, it could, you know, hinder that. And so the idea of a future is an abstraction that we ponder our futures all the time. We're obsessed with it. We're also dwelling on our pasts. But that there is a future, that there are different futures, different possible futures, that it is within yourself to decide which one you want and you should strive for, also makes this notion of hope very difficult. These are three ingredients you need to make hope. And so in North Korea, like when Kim Jong-il was born, and of course when he died, there's this thing called spontaneous bark carving that supposedly happens there. And the bark of the trees in North Korea all spontaneously carved messages of grief for the dearly departed Kim Jong-il. And go look at the videos on YouTube, people bowing down before the trees that have carved these messages to Kim Jong-il and sharing these messages, mourning with the trees the loss of the dear leader. Of course, no human being in the world could think that a tree spontaneously carves messages in its bark. They're not sentient beings. We all know that. They're not fools there. But they must do it. The falseness and the real become folded together. It can't be real, but it must be real for survival. They become one. The fake tear and the real tear become one, right? We can't imagine taking different. We live in a land of choices. We live in a land of possibilities. We can refute anything, find an opposite argument for anything. We know that there are different choices, and we can't wrap our heads around them being folded into one. And when they get out, they have a difficult time separating them, if that makes sense. So it's a lot of this question about what they're doing is a question about us and how we see the world, too.
You know, I think that's a really great place to end the night. I know we could talk a lot longer, but I also said we would get out of here on time. So I think we will wrap it up now.
I'd be happy to answer any. I'm going to inscribe some books out there. I'd be happy to sign a book. If you have a question or you want to share an anecdote, I'll be out there. You'd be happy to.
Yeah. So thank
us.
you so very much. That was wonderful. Walnut Creek TV is here tonight filming this, and Matt, I'm so sorry I left the dates sitting on my desk. If you check WCTV, their website, or my website, wclibrary.org, I will put the dates of when it's going to be broadcast so you can see it again. If you get WCTV, Contra Costa TV also plays the videos of our programs, and I do put them on my website when Matt gives me the DVD. So thank you so much for coming.